I'm going to take a shot at replacing a tambourine head today, and I've got my raw materials laid out. I'll talk through those. I have Gorilla Glue. My understanding is it's waterproof glue, so it works pretty well for this sort of application that's going to be wet when we get started. Have a couple of pieces of sandpaper, have a sponge, we'll see what that's for a little bit later on, the tambourine itself, and I have this giant hose clamp. And it's actually, this is the trick, you can't find a hose clamp this big in an auto parts store, at most auto parts store, but what you can find are two hose clamps that are almost this big. So what I did was I asked for the biggest hose clamps that they have. They're probably 5 or 6 inches, and then you unscrew them all the way at the adjustment, and then you take the flat end of one hose clamp and you feed it into the receiving end of the other, and that way you can connect two together to get one big enough that fits on a 12-inch tambourine. You could, I've seen other videos where they use rubber bands. I don't really know a great source for a rubber band that's big enough for a 12-inch tambourine, and that's why I'm doing the hose clamp trick. So I've got hose clamps, I've got glue, got sponge, got sandpaper, screwdriver for removing the old head and tacks. I have the tambourine itself. It's an inexpensive instrument, so I don't mind experimenting on it. This is one that I bought in a mom and pop store, and it's a 12-inch tambourine with 2 rows of jingles. I have some rubber gloves sitting over there. And then most importantly, this is what inspired this job, is I have a piece of goat skin. I was in Portland about a month ago, and I went to Rhythm Traders, and they had a stack of these circles of goat skin in various sizes, and this is 14 inches, which should be big enough to rehead this 12-inch tambourine. So my first step then, actually the first step started a couple of hours ago, and that was getting that goat head submerged in water. You soak it in a bucket or a big pan or on a cookie sheet or something where it can be fully submerged. Leave it there for at least a half hour. I think this has been in the water for a couple of hours, and that way it becomes very pliable. It's not stiff anymore, and it's as loose and stretched out as it's going to be because it's absorbed all of that water. And then my next step is, as carefully as possible, I'm going to use my screwdriver and kind of get in under these tacks and remove every tack, trying to save the head while I do it. And I could use maybe a putty knife too, or something that's a little bit more delicate. But I think in this case they'll all come out. Well, the tacks came out really, really easily. I only needed a screwdriver. They were in there pretty loose, and fortunately for this project today, the head was only tacked on. Sometimes they're tacked and glued, or sometimes they're glued, and when they are, it's difficult to save the old head. But because this one was just tacked on, pretty easy to save the old skin head, and I am going to save that because I have a friend that has a smaller tambourine, so I'll give this to him and he can do that. And then the other thing too is because it wasn't glued on, there's not a lot of debris to remove either. There's no real glue mess or anything like that going on here. So my next step, I'm going to do a little bit of light sanding, and then I'll get my area ready to put the new head on. So let's see, I'll grab this is 120 grit sandpaper, and just spend a few minutes sanding around the edge here. Here's where it starts to get interesting. I've got the goat skin that's been soaking in water for a couple of hours. I'm removing the excess water, have my Gorilla Glue all ready to go, and we're just about ready to put the new head on the old tambourine. So I'm going to get rid of any excess moisture here. And Gorilla Glue, the instructions are damp it, glue it, and clamp it. And so fortunately we already have one side that's damp and ready to go. Set that aside for a second. Here's our tambourine. Clean that off a little bit. Now I'll take my Gorilla Glue and try to get a good, not very thick, but continuous bead along the bearing edge here. And then also around, I'm going to do it on the outside too, so we've got really good adhesion. Almost there. Make sure that I don't miss any spots. And just about done. Okay, there's that. And now being very careful not to get it all over my hands, I'm going to put a little bit on the outside too. You don't need much because Gorilla Glue expands as it dries. So just the lightest bit of a continuous bead is going to be more than enough. In fact, we'll have to wipe a lot of this away as it dries, well, as we put the head on. And it's good that I did a little bit of sanding, because I can tell that this glue wants to adhere to the dry wood, but not so much to the finished wood. So, I think we're all set now. Like this, put my lid on so I don't make a mess. Almost there. This aside. Now there is, if you're really paying attention, there's a coarse side and a smooth side. Frankly, I've seen them mounted either way, so I'm not too concerned about what's right or wrong. I think I'm putting the coarse side out. I'm trying to do this where I don't make too much of a mess with the glue. And right now I'm just trying to drape it evenly over the tambourine. Does it. Grab my clamp. There we go. That seems like it's going on pretty well. I want to be sure to have a little bit overhanging everywhere around the clamp, because we'll go through afterwards after it's dry and use a box cutter or an X-Acto knife to cut off the excess. And I'm trying to pull it tight enough that I don't have any wrinkles. Now, I'm not an expert at this. I've only done this once or twice before. But when I did it before, it seemed like if I just had enough tension to make a tone, that was plenty, because it's going to dry out, and I'm sure the weather depends, has an impact on it as well. But it's going to dry out and pull tighter as it goes. So now I think I've got that in place where I want it. Grab my screwdriver and tighten up my hose clamps. And here too, this is where, if you're not careful, it can kind of crimp the head in weird ways. So I want to keep an eye on it and make sure that we don't end up with any problems with that. So I think I've got it. I've got the head on, I've got it, my hose clamps tightened down. It has a little bit of tension on it, just enough to hear a tone. I hope that's enough. It seems like it's pretty flappy right now. We'll see how it turns out. And then the last thing that I'm going to do, well, I've wiped up, actually I see a little bit of glue residue that I want to wipe up here. And then, remember our sponge from earlier. I'm going to take that sponge, and as the tambourine dries, I want to leave this sponge sitting in the middle of the tambourine. And that's a trick I learned from my professor, Gary Cook, at University of Arizona. Maybe you only need to do it in extremely dry climates, but I'm doing it here in Seattle. And the reason why is that enables the head to dry at the outside where the glue is before it's fully tensioned. Otherwise, if you don't put that sponge in the middle, it will dry in the center, and that will pull that glue away from the tambourine shell and pull the head off the tambourine before the glue is really set. So hopefully this trick works. Maybe you don't need it in moist climates like Seattle, but I'm going to do it anyway. And that's it. We'll let it sit for a day, and tomorrow it should be ready to play. and in a couple of days it'll probably be fully tensioned. It might be a little bit loose for a day or two. So it's the next day, my sponge is just about dry. The head has a lot of tension on it now, hopefully not too much as it dries out. It's going to be pretty tight. And I'm going to use a utility knife to cut around the edge of the hose clamp and cut away the excess. The razor blade goes right through the goat skin. It's pretty easy, and then you just pull off the excess goat skin. There's a little bit of glue residue, and you know, that's probably a good point. If this were a $150 instrument, I might have taken more care to mask off the jingles and make a real clean line where to be sure that I don't get any glue residue on the tambourine shell. But given that this is a $15 instrument, I don't really care, and it's easy enough to clean it off too. The Gorilla Glue ends up being like just a little bit of foam when it's done because it expands as it dries. And then finally, we're at our last step here, and that is to remove the hose clamp. It comes off easily, and I haven't glued it to the shell. Doesn't look like I did. Feels like it's letting go. More. There it goes. Looks like the glue's holding. Got a pretty good seal all the way around. So now it's a tambourine. It's the head's pretty tight, so know that when we put it on, it was really loose, barely had any tension. And right now it's a dry day today, and it's pretty tight. So the only caution I think I would give through all of this is be sure you don't over tension the head when you first put it on, because you can end up in trouble with it actually pulling the shell, collapsing the shell of the tambourine. And that's it. $9 head, and I think I spent a couple of dollars on hose clamps and whatever Gorilla Glue costs, and we've got a tambourine that's back to playable condition.